Spectator's weekly look ahead to politics. I'm Fraser Nelson, and with me are my colleagues Isabel Hardman and Douglas Murray. David Cameron is back from holiday, has lost no time in getting stuck into Iraq. He had a big piece in the Sunday Telegraph describing a generational struggle against the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. And this morning we've had Michael Fallon, the new Defence Secretary, making very hawkish noises from Cyprus about the length of time we're going to be in Iraq for this time around. So, Isabel, talk us through what's happened over the last 2 days. David Cameron has struck a rather hawkish tone, hasn't he?
He has, although he hasn't given a huge amount of detail about what he wants to do. He's sort of trying to set the case, make the case for a long engagement in Iraq, whether that's through, he said, aid, diplomacy and military prowess. That was the list in that order that he gave.
Yeah, it seems, reading his article here, he says we should avoid sending armies to fight or occupy, so he's ruled that out.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we need to stem the onslaught of this dangerous terrorist movement. So we're going to fight them, but not with armies. Is he basically saying an air campaign?
Well, that's certainly what Michael Fallon seems to have been suggesting. He sketched out a lot more detail of what we're already doing, which does sound a lot like military combat in some ways, which actually some MPs might want to be consulted on before that starts in earnest. It seems to involve the RAF getting involved with what America's doing in Iraq to stop ISIS. It seems to be also airdrops, which we're already doing. But Michael Fallon did also say that some military personnel had been on the ground to assist the Chinooks that have gone over there, but that's obviously not quite the same as boots on the ground in the way that all politicians fear these days. It's just some boots on the ground and then disappearing again.
Right. And Douglas, this time last week we were worried about a potential massacre in the Sinjar Mountains. There was going to be a rescue operation. We woke up on Thursday morning to read that Britain was about to join it. It was then cancelled. The Americans decided their intelligence said that there weren't as many up there as they feared. So are the airdrops working? Are we actually succeeding in providing aid to them and also pushing ISIS back from the border?
It's not clear, but over the weekend there have been a few developments on that. There were a number of airstrikes by American forces on Saturday of a convoy, several convoys, not far from Erbil actually, and so obviously any of the hits on the ISIS targets are going to set ISIS back a bit. The details of exactly what the Mount Sinjar situation is have been very sketchy, I have to say. I think there's a real lack of information, both in the media and it seems at governmental level, of exactly what is going on here. Of course, also over the weekends there have been a bit more detail coming out of exactly what the Yazidi populations have been going through in areas where ISIS has taken control, which I think will do something to firm up a portion of public and indeed political opinion that something must be done.
And Isabel, Michael Fallon is new Defence Secretary. He is already sounding rather different to Philip Hammond when he was in that role, isn't he?
Yes, I think one of the reasons for this is actually just that Michael Fallon's a very good communicator. He's very good at speaking out, but he's also quite a blunt communicator as well. So it may not be that there's been a shift in the government's position. It may just be that Fallon is happier to give us more details of what they're up to.
And when we heard him in RAF Akrotiri yesterday, he was just saying to the troops, I want you to know people back home are very proud of what you're doing. This is sort of wartime rhetoric almost. So it seems to be, which is funny because David Cameron had led us to believe the Parliament would be recalled if he was to deploy forces. It's a bit unclear as to what the Prime Minister's conditions are for Parliament to be recalled, to have a debate, to have a vote. But it does seem as if we're creeping towards... MPs are going to come back to find themselves in the middle of a third Iraq war, are they?
Well, I think this is probably the worry of many MPs actually, that there'll be mission creep and that they won't be consulted on it or even given the chance to scrutinise it. MPs obviously don't actually have power over whether or not we go to war. It's just that the convention is that they are consulted. And Philip Hammond last week, I've written it down just so I can remember it, Philip Hammond last week was asked about recalling Parliament and he said, we have a very clear convention about consulting Parliament before British forces are committed into any kind of combat role, but we're not talking about that here.
And Douglas, talking about mission creep, the Kurds are willing and able and keen to take the fight to ISIS. They now share a 600-mile border with these guys. We have in the Kurdish army one of the most effective fighting forces in the region. But these guys are fighting for something else, aren't they? They're fighting for their own independence. Might the outcome of this be Britain helping Kurdistan in the battle which might be remembered as its battle for independence?
Yes, it could very well be. The situation, as I see it, with the Kurdish issue in Iraq is that post 2003, nobody wanted really to touch, nobody in the international community wanted to touch the issue of Kurdish independence. There's a very strong, very legitimate call for independence in the region from the Kurds. It does, of course, if it starts in Iraq, there is a problem that almost every other neighbouring country effectively has a call for Kurdish independence. In that country, I mean, you end up mucking up, the borders with Iran, with Turkey, and so on. So nobody really wanted to open that can of worms for that reason, but also because there was I think, legitimate belief post-2003 that the Kurds, having had effectively a 10-year head start in statehood, thanks to the no-fly zones after the first Gulf War, that desire for statehood had to be sort of quelled for a period because the Kurds, with this head start, would be such a good stabilising influence in Iraq. Now, I think they have been a stabilising influence. However, at this stage, more than 10 years on from the Second Iraq War, the Kurdish call for independence is, I think, going to become increasingly difficult to resist, partly because of the sectarianism under the Maliki administration, which may well continue under the new Prime Minister, but also simply that the Kurdish experience of being a stabilising force could very well be said at this stage to have evaporated, that this was beyond their control, that this was beyond their ability to stabilise, and that the sectarian and indeed deeply conflicted country, which is now Iraq, would be best with them out, and that they could protect themselves and have their own state. I think that we will be hearing a lot more of that in the coming months.
And what do you think, Isabel, that Britain's foreign policy is with Iraq? How strongly do you think we still believe in the one Iraq policy? I mean, if I imagine there's a new Prime Minister in Baghdad, he's there ironically with American and Iranian support. They all agreed it was time that Maliki should go. We've got in somebody who's got sufficiently low profile not to be resisted or seen as intolerable in Iraq. But if we want Iraq to stay together as a country, it's crucial, isn't it, that this new Prime Minister should be able to repair the damage done and by Maliki, should be able to emphasise this is not a Shiite government, this is a Shiite and Sunni government. So, in theory, David Cameron should be giving lots of support to Baghdad, when in fact we seem to be giving, we've just appointed an ambassador to Kurdistan, it seems, a special representative to the region. So do you expect to be hearing much about that, or is this simply beyond Britain's comprehension now, do you think?
I'm not sure we know what our policy is anymore, but in so much as there is one, I think it's that we will support the new Prime Minister so long as he creates a genuinely united and representative government and abandons the sectarian policies of his predecessor. And that's what Cameron has been saying over the past few days, that they will support him and continue to support him. But that's not really a policy beyond just saying, well, well done and good luck, basically.
There is a huge set of problems down the line on this. Malcolm Rifkin's piece this morning highlights part of this, which is effectively that what seems to be Britain's current desires for Iraq include a necessary increasing closeness between this country and, for instance, the government of Iran.
Yeah.
That is a problem akin to the one which has been highlighted, many people have talked about it over the weekend, of British forces now going to war precisely with the kind of people that only a year ago we were talking about getting close to arming.
Yeah. Of course, the Iranians, all of us have seen this movie before, insofar as the last time there was a Sunni insurgency, it was led by Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which we now know as ISIS. It was defeated because the Sunni tribes were encouraged to rise up and take these guys on themselves by a government of Baghdad that was seen as being Sunni and Shia. Now, Kurdistan, they all protect their own borders. You can't really see them clearing up western Iraq.
No.
That can only be done by an Iraqi army. So, oddly, isn't it within the interests of both Britain and Iran that there should be a balanced and popular government in Baghdad which is capable of inspiring the Sunni tribes to do what they did 7 or 8 years ago, which is take the fight to ISIS? Yes,
although it has to be remembered that one of the reasons why that worked in the 2007 period particularly was because of a very, very involved American contribution. There were the best American generals and others were involved in making sure that the Sunni awakening happened. It's sort of very easy, rather like referendums. If nothing happens, if it goes the way that everyone wants and the status quo remains, it's very easy to assume that was always going to be the case. It's very easy in hindsight to think the Sunni awakening was always going to happen. It wasn't always going to happen. It happened with enormous American help.